AWS is super powerful, but it can be complicated to build with. But with the new Claude AI model and the SST framework, we can deploy apps and resources to AWS just by prompting. So with Claude 4, the knowledge cutoff is in 2025. This creates potential for AI assistance with more recently developed tools and libraries for programming. So one use case of this is SST. SST is an infrastructure as code tool that makes it easy to build on AWS. It's similar to Terraform, but at a higher level of abstraction. You simply define your resources in a JavaScript configuration file, and it will create or update these resources in your own AWS account. So I'm going to do a demonstration of using Claude to deploy to AWS. And for that, I just have this simple weather app that I made in React and Python, where you can get the weather for any city in the US. And I'll do a quick walkthrough of the code before we deploy it. So my backend is in Python and the front end is React and JavaScript. So in the front end code, we have this cities configuration, which has all our cities for that menu. And in each, we have the coordinates. So when we call the backend to get the weather data, we pass in those coordinates to the Lambda function. And then in the Lambda function, we call this OpenMateo API to get the weather data. And then we have some helper functions that will transform that data and make it easier to read in the UI itself. And then the UI is pretty straightforward. It's just a React app. And for CSS, I'm using Material UI. And for fetching, I'm using React Query. So right now, I'm just running my code locally. So I have this script that runs my backend code as a Flask app so that we can run it as an API. And then we're running that API here. And then we're just running the React code using Vite. So now let's deploy this app to AWS so we can access it on the internet. Okay, so I wrote this prompt in Cursor that's going to set up our deployment. And first, there's a couple of prereqs to get this to work. So one, you need an AWS account and you need your credentials in your local environment so that you can connect to your account. You need SST installed. And we need to be doing this with Claude 4. And I'm doing it here in Cursor with agent mode. So I wrote this prompt to generate the SST code for our deployment. So I just told it to generate code for the Lambda function and an API gateway to expose that. And then the SST code for the UI, which is just going to deploy to AWS using CloudFront and S3. And I also told it to deploy to a production stage. So one cool feature with SST is that it has built-in support for different environments. So first we're going to deploy to a production environment, and then we'll create a separate development environment after. So after running the prompt, we now have this SST config file where we've defined our AWS resources. So we have an API gateway resource, we have a Lambda function to run our backend code, and then we have our static site resource. And to actually deploy this, it's created a simple deploy shell script that's going to run our npm run deploy, which then points to this SST deploy command. So I went ahead and ran this in Cursor, and we can see that it went ahead and ran the SST code that was generated, and it's deployed our site. So if we grab this URL here, there we go. Our weather site is now deployed to the internet, and it works exactly the same way. We can get the weather for anywhere in the US, and this is all deployed in AWS. As you can see here, our URL is a CloudFront URL. And I'm not going to get a domain or anything for this video, but SST can also handle that configuration as well. So we can see how easy it is to deploy to AWS using this combination of Claude 4 and SST. And there's so much more you can do with this. Of course, SST is really powerful and leverages a lot of what AWS has to offer. And I'll show off one more small feature of SST in this video. And with that, we'll deploy a development environment. So SST has this concept called stages, which is just different environments. So you can easily deploy a production environment, a development environment, and if you need more development environments, you can just deploy them pretty easily on the fly. So I wrote this prompt to set up a new development environment, and let's go ahead and run this. So after running that prompt, it created a new deployment script here in our package.json, which just deploys with the dev stage. And then in our SST config, we pass in the stage as an environment variable, and then in our app code, we can read that environment variable and then do whatever we need to. So in this case, I just had it render a simple banner that says, hey, this is the development environment, and we can see that deployed right here. So we have our development environment and our production environment deployed completely separately. And then if we go into the AWS console, we can see our resources. So here's our dev and prod lambdas. We can take a look at these. So here's all our backend code deployed, and our front end code is also deployed as well. Yeah, so we have our dev and our prod S3 right here. So yeah, hopefully this video shows the potential of combining AI with infrastructure as code.